Our guest today, Susan Permut, has been an adjunct professor at Boston University's Law School for over 3 years, teaching corporate governance. She has her own consulting firm, and before that, for almost a quarter century, she was senior vice president, deputy general counsel, and assistant secretary for EMC Corporation up in Boston. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Susan, adjunct professor, kindred spirit, teaching corporate governance to the youth, or maybe people our age. I know when I first started teaching the topic, it actually was an executive MBA class, and I was in my low 40s at the time, and a lot of people in the class were about my age. So that was interesting in itself. But then I went on to teach it to law school students who were in their 20s. So I had sort of two different types of audiences, and they were different. It was interesting to compare and contrast. So how do you go about designing each of your classes?
So first of all, Brock, thank you so much for inviting me to join you on Zippy Point. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm psyched. So yeah, it's cool. Cool new venture. So I'm glad you asked me that question, and I'll go through sort of, step by step. So it'll be a little bit of a longer answer. So what I did first, Brock, was think about what are the most important corporate governance concepts that I want the students to be familiar with. So I spent a fair amount of time narrowing it down. So what I decided to do, I start with an overview session, and then we have about half the sessions that deal with boards of directors, and then the other half we turn to shareholder matters. And then we throw in a couple of things. I have one session on executive comp, for instance. For each topic, I try to cover it's really a tall order to do this in one semester as an overview, but I want to cover the basics and then also the current trends and the hot topics. So what I should also mention is that the course is an experiential course, which is very different. There are a number of governance courses, but I believe they're more seminars. Anyway, it's experiential. So what I do is I start with the drafting assignment. So they have a drafting assignment almost every week as homework. And I try to pick out the most important things that I want them to learn, and I weave that into the drafting assignment. And then I have to decide what resources I want to give them as reading materials to enable them to do the drafting assignment. So the other thing I'll say is that my view is that the course is about 50% content and about 50, which is governance, our field, and about 50% skills-based. And so the skills that I'm really wanting the students to work with in this course are largely communication skills. Because as lawyers, they're going to have a lot of technical information. We all have a lot of technical information, but we need to know how to most effectively deliver that to our business clients. So first we focus on a lot of written communication skills, so hence the drafting assignments. And I do different forms of communication. So sometimes they'll do a PowerPoint, sometimes a memo, sometimes an email to a client. And almost always I have a word limit or a page limit, because I really want them to learn how to write succinctly for their business clients. Then we also do some work on some oral communication skills. And surprisingly, a lot of them tell me that they don't really do that much of that in law school, so they appreciate the opportunity to work on their oral communication skills each week. And so most of the classes include some kind of presentation. It could be a presentation to a board committee. It could be a presentation to a client. So that's part of what I have to weave in also. And then part of that is that because it's a 2-hour class, so there's a lot of time to cover. And so the way I design it is about the first half is an activity where the students are very involved, and then the second half is a bit more of a facilitated discussion. So for the first part being the activity, I have to design the drafting assignment to segue into a class activity. So it could be a presentation, it could be a simulated negotiation or something like that. So there's really a lot of thought that goes into how the drafting is designed, both to teach them the content and to work on their skills. And then just the last thing I'll say is that I do about half individual assignments and half team assignments. And sometimes the students gripe about that a little. It's hard for them to coordinate. Someone does it faster than somebody else. But I've been told to keep those in, and I really think those are good skills for the students to learn, because when they begin practicing, they're going to need to collaborate and work with other lawyers. In the law school setting, I also think it's almost like a study group. They learn from each other as they're working on the assignment during the week. So I keep the half individual assignments and half team assignments, and it does almost always work really well.
Yeah, your students are very lucky to have you, because that's true. I mean, in the real world, when you go to the workplace, you are working mostly in teams, particularly now in the pandemic. Yeah. You're solo by yourself while you're working, but it's electronically you're working together.
Exactly, and that's another thing the students say, is that they appreciate during the pandemic that opportunity to connect with their classmates for a bit during the week.
Yeah, it is weird as I reflect back on law school that moot court was really the only time you definitely got trained a little bit in public speaking. And even that was, I think you gave one presentation.
Right.
There wasn't a whole lot to that. Although my memory is a little foggy, it's been a while.
No, exactly. So they tell me that they really appreciate the speaking and the communication training.
So it sounds that you've already told us a lot about how you keep the students engaged. What other things do you do to help them be refreshed in the mind?
Yep. So I keep it very interactive, and I try to have each student participate every week so that they stay awake, they don't get Zoom fatigue, and then I don't have to talk as much if they're speaking up every class. So I really keep it very interactive with all the speaking opportunities and the activities. And then I also have some guest speakers, so they're hearing from different people with different perspectives, and they really appreciate that. And then we use lots of current examples, and I think that keeps them engaged. We use companies that they've heard about, companies that have interesting things going on, and then it keeps them engaged for class, but also engaged because then outside of class, if they're reading any business news, it helps them sort of have a window into that company, because we've talked about it from a governance perspective.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a never-ending supply of governance.
Exactly.
Mailstorms to draw from.
Exactly.
Never ends. So how did you reimagine the class once the pandemic hit and you knew that it was going to be a virtual setting only?
Right. So my class is 100% virtual. I will say at BU Law School, a lot of the classes are hybrid. So their BU is really trying to do, as much as they can to bring students back into the classroom safely. My class is 100% virtual. So, on one hand, it was pretty easy to reimagine it for virtual because I already have a lot of self-directed learning with the drafting assignments and the resources I give them. On the other hand, it's actually been much more work than I had anticipated to morph it into a virtual class. And because it's interactive, I really had to think through how I was going to transform all of that online, which I think is definitely different than a lecture class where you're just delivering the same lecture but doing it on Zoom. And so I try to use as many of the functions on Zoom that I can. So I use a lot of breakout sessions. And in addition to the students working, offline during the week, this gives them the opportunity to work in a small group during the class session. Some of them are long if we do a simulated negotiation or something like that. Others maybe just a 5-minute breakout to help them to coordinate before they're going to do their presentation. So we do breakouts. I've used polling questions, which has been really a lot of fun, and they've liked that. And not every class lends itself to the polling questions, but that's been good. And this sort of makes me chuckle. I had conferences with the students last week, and they said that my class was using Zoom more than any other class they had. And that just makes me laugh because I view myself as fairly technologically challenged. But it's working for the students, so that's good. And I think that doing my class 100% remotely is actually easier than if I were in the classroom and doing it hybrid, because those professors are in class with a mask, with a percentage of the students in the class socially distancing and other students on Zoom. So I think that is ending up being way more complex, both from a technology standpoint and a perspective of engaging with students.
Yeah, I think the breakouts really is a great feature that Zoom has in a mindfulness program. And we meet as a big group, there's 90 of us, and then we get broken out and we're in groups of 4 for about 15 minutes periodically. And that's a nice balance between the lecture and then small intimate conversation.
Yeah, it's really been great and easier to use than I thought it would be. The polling questions have been a little harder to input those in advance. And I thought I was going to have to set up the breakout rooms rather in advance, but you can't actually do it until the participants, or I haven't figured out how to do it until the participants are there in the main room. But it's pretty easy to do. So I found the functions on Zoom pretty easy to use.
So overall, what do you find to be the hardest part of serving as an adjunct professor?
The hardest part, that's a good question. So I've been doing it for a few years now. The first year was pretty hard, just transitioning into the role and designing the class. It's gotten easier each year. It's still a lot of work, which surprises me, really more work than I had expected. The other thing, Brock, is that adjuncts are pretty isolated from the rest of the faculty, and that's hard. So, part of why people are in an academic setting is for the academic milieu, and adjuncts don't really get that much of it. What's interesting for me is that, ironically, this year I've had the opportunity to be a little more connected with some of the faculty, because BU did a lot of training sessions over the summer that a lot of the university faculty participated in, and in particular the law school faculty. So I got actually I feel a bit more connected as I got to meet virtually some of the faculty for the first time. So that was really, really nice for me.
Yeah, my experience was the same, that as an adjunct, your connections with the dean was normally when you got hired and, get renewed every year. But other than that, it's pretty limited. And then I went to a few meetings with the full faculty, and it wasn't that exciting.
Yeah.
I did learn a little bit how it all works.
Yeah, I've gotten invited to some like a symposia or an afternoon meeting or something like that. And I've actually had some interesting interactions that way. And then with one particular professor who I was connected with, who's a visiting professor, who's invited me to speak on a webinar and guest lecture for a class that she did. So I've had some interesting connections like that. And that's actually built a little bit over the years.
Yeah. What about the best part of being an adjunct?
So the best part for sure is when the students get excited about the content and the class. That's the most rewarding. They feel like they're learning and that it's relevant. They say, wow, I see this in the mainstream press. I used this in my externship last week. This is going to be helpful for me in my summer job. So that's really rewarding for me when I find that it's useful for the students and relevant. And I'll tell you one story. This past spring during the pandemic, I got an email from a former student who told me that his first assignment as a summer associate was a director independence question under one of the proxy advisor policies. So that was really fun for me to see that he was putting the information to use right away. So, when we went to law school, I think law school did very little to prepare us for a corporate law practice. Surprisingly, I think there's more now, but not enough and not that much more. And so it's gratifying for me to know that the students are using the material. Just a couple of side things for me personally, being an adjunct, I'm doing a little bit of consulting, and so this helps me keep on top of things, which really is very synergistic with the with the consulting practice. I mentioned a couple of the connections I've had with other faculty, which have kept me in the game. A fun thing also where I'm getting a little bit more connected with the academic environment is that this fall, a second-year student approached me to be her faculty advisor on her law review note, which is a corporate governance topic outside of the US. And so I was actually never on law reviews. This is a really new experience for me. Yeah. But really fun because I feel this way I'm going to work with her throughout the whole year as she's writing her note. And it gives me the opportunity to work with her back and forth on drafts. And so that's been really fun and really rewarding. So I guess if I were to, sum it up, for me, being an adjunct is not for everybody. It's really not for everyone. But for me, it's worked out well over the last few years. It's been a good place kind of to hang my hat in the governance field, so to speak, and a way to continue to stay involved in governance, which obviously is a field that I love.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I remember my favorite professors being the ones that were adjuncts because the material just tended to felt more real world.
Right.
And so when I was serving as an adjunct, I felt like, it was in my own mind, but that I was providing real value to the students. Who knows really how they felt about me, but.
Well, I'm sure you did. And, I think that's what all the adjuncts hope for.
Yeah,
so,
just do your best. And
yeah,
I mean, some of the students are not intending to be corporate governance experts, but maybe you might persuade one or two to enter the field and you've impacted 2 lives. And
well, that's right. And what I also try to do is explain how this really, you don't have to go into a career in corporate governance. You could be an M&A lawyer, and it's important to know these things about a target company, or you could be going into venture capital or private equity, and these are things that you should be familiar with about a company that you're going to invest in. And then some students are really interested in in-house practice, so we talk a little bit about how outside counsel might use some of these things versus inside counsel. So so I try to broaden the relevance because, truthfully, not that many of them are going to really end up specializing in corporate governance.
So I remember Susan talking to you when you left EMC and you were thinking about doing this. So you've really taken the ball and run with it. It sounds like you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Brock. Yeah, it's like I say, it's worked out for me, and it's been, sort of a focus for me staying in governance, but then enabling me to, really round out my professional life. So I'm really pleased with it. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.